Welcome to episode 4 of the podcast, A Lawyer and Dyslexic. On this episode, we have Samantha Forsyth. She's dyslexic, but also a criminal barrister of 33 years cool. She just recently stepped into civil work. She has quite a wide range of experience in defending people with sex offences, helping defend people with mental health issues, as well as some juicy murder trials by the looks of her profile. She also likes to supervise pupil barristers on their beginning of the barrister journey. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Excellent. So I thought where we'd start off first is, I understand that you actually found out you were dyslexic quite late on in life.
I did. I was only diagnosed formally when my daughter was diagnosed about 5 years ago. I had no idea at that point I was dyslexic. I've always known there were certain things I couldn't do. I cannot tell my left from my right. And that was fun with my driving test. I had it written on my hand.
Yes.
And I still can't tie shoelaces. And please do not ask me to do my times tables, because if anyone asks me to do 7 times 8, I freeze and just go into complete meltdown because I can't do it.
I'm the same with the timetables. I can't do it. The left and right thing, I remember my watch is on my left hand, so I'm always wearing a watch because I'd get lost. But yes. So you were saying only 5 years ago when your daughter, she's been stamaneted with dyslexia as well then?
Yeah, she has. A friend of mine who's a teacher picked it up because she was struggling with her English. She's very articulate,
yes,
has a wide vocabulary, but she struggles putting things down on paper. She would do anything to avoid doing homework at school, so it was becoming a real battle. So she suggested she might be, and we went to see an educational psychologist who picked up her dyslexia very quickly. But it was quite embarrassing. I was sitting there in the assessment and my daughter was struggling with certain things, and I was sitting there thinking, I can't do that. Oh, sugar, this problem's come from me. Is this a problem? Should I call it a problem? What do I call it? What's the wording for it? And a very, very lovely woman called Dr. Susan Boyd, who's an educational psychologist in Birmingham, offered to do a quick assessment for me there and then and said, yes, you are a classic dyslexic. And up to that point, I'd heard of the term, but didn't really know what it meant. I always knew I was special, but I didn't realise there was a name for my speciality.
I imagine that was a big light bulb moment. And you and your daughter have been going through the sort of journey of working out the dyslexic world together then?
Absolutely. And it has been. And because I've sat back and looked at things in my life and think, well, I remember when I was 11, my first week at secondary school, I had an awful biology teacher at the front of the class stood up and said, whose book is this? And I sort of sheepishly put my hand up and she flung the book at me and said, I cannot read your writing. Is it 2 spiders copulating on a page? Which was quite shocking, really.
Yeah.
For an 11-year-old. And she made me stand up and read it out. And I cannot write properly. And my spelling is atrocious. Although, funnily enough, my grammar is quite good.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's weird. And when I was doing my degree, I had to read out my degree papers, my final degree papers, to the whole of the University of Wales Senate, because they couldn't read them either.
Really? So, because yes, yours would have been handwritten, wouldn't they? Your dissertation. Yeah,
handwritten.
What was your degree in?
Law.
Okay, so you managed to get all the way through a law degree, and being a practicing barrister of quite significant experience while being dyslexic and not even realising it.
Yeah, sounds very strange. Sounds very, very strange indeed. But yeah, I think partly because the area I chose to go in at first was criminal law.
Yes. And
most of that is courtroom based. It's oral advocacy.
Right.
So I'm quite good. One of the reasons I went to do it was sadly a barrister who's now passed away, a guy called Wilbert Harris, said to me once that I had a big gob. He said, you're argumentative and you've got a big gob. Your handwriting's atrocious, but no one cares about that. So I've been carrying on with my big argumentative gob ever since.
That's an interesting way of motivating you to take up a life at the bar, is that you are argumentative and like to talk.
Absolutely. He was a fascinating bloke. Sadly, he died a couple of weeks ago, but he was one of the first black barristers at the bar. And it was fascinating talking to him about the difficulties that he'd had because of the colour of his skin, which were atrocious.
Yes.
And constantly, even when he went down to the Court of Appeal, being shown into the dock because people assumed he was a defendant.
Yes, that's Yeah.
eye-opening, really.
It is terrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
How things have changed.
Absolutely. Now I'm doing civil work, which is quite odd because it's the stuff I do is personal injury and employer's liability, and it's very much rule-based, procedure-based. And I've had to learn a whole new body of law quite quickly. And I bought a load of books to help me do it and realised that reading them was a bit difficult.
Yes.
So I started listening. I am very much an oral person in terms of I like to listen to people. I pick up a lot of information that way rather than reading, and I love audiobooks. So I think I'm probably the only person who's listened to the whole of the White Book on an audiobook.
Yeah, the White Book is the civil barrister's Bible, isn't it?
It's a great cure for insomnia. If anyone ever has trouble sleeping, CPR Rule 30 will send you to sleep straight away.
All right.
But it hit me when I was doing a new area of law that, yes, I was dyslexic, and I was having to do things, take myself outside my comfort zone, which was interesting at my age, as I'm over 50. So it really hit me for the first time at that point.
So would you think that actually you would have learnt civil law post being stamaneted? Because I guess that's after you and your daughter found out. Did you then find that it helped you knowing when you basically had to relearn a complete new arm of law?
It really did, because I think if I'd have gone into it and not known that I was, or my daughter was, and didn't have that experience, I would have really struggled. I'd have just sat here with books trying to absorb the information. And I use coloured overlay and coloured glasses now.
Yes,
which really help with, because sometimes when I'm reading things, I'll drop down onto the next line and I mix up lines sometimes. And I think without knowing that, I might well have given up. It might have been it might have been too difficult to do. And the other thing is, because civil law is more logical in the sense that how we culturally perceive logic to be, it took me a long time to get my head around it. Although a lot of people find it much easier than crime because you're not having to deal with real people in many ways.
Yes,
it
no
is
jury
very
in
logical,
civil, is there?
very few juries. It's more procedure and logical stuff. And my brain doesn't really work in that way, although I've sort of had to adapt it to working in a wholly new, different way, which is interesting.
Yes, yeah. So you mentioned earlier that actually you had to read your law dissertation out to your university higher faculty.
Senate. Yeah, I did.
Because they couldn't read it, but they still gave you the degree.
They did. They knocked me down. They said I would have had a first, but for the fact I had to read it out. So they gave me a 2-1 in the end.
Really?
They knocked me down because of my handwriting. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, they did.
It's annoying.
They liked, when I read it out, they said, oh, this makes perfect sense. This is actually rather good and insightful. But because we couldn't read it in the first place, and you've made us all come here and had to sit here for a morning reading every single paper out, we're going to knock you down. And at the time, I didn't really care. I suppose I was a little miffed. I suppose my ego was miffed. But
yes,
I just wanted a 2-1. So luckily, I was very fortunate. I got a discretionary grant from Birmingham to go to bar school. It was last year. So as long as I got a 2-1, I didn't really care.
Oh, I see.
I was one of the fortunate few, the last generation, who was actually paid to go to bar school, who got a grant.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. So that surprised me, I guess, because obviously going to university with computers, and when I went to university, we had all the extra support for being dyslexic in.
Yeah.
I imagine way back when you did it, there wouldn't have really been, would it even been recognised as a thing? I guess you didn't know because you didn't find out till in your 50s.
I had no idea at all. The biggest debate when I was at university was whether people should be allowed to speak Welsh, because it was a Welsh university.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
Dyslexia, I don't remember anyone ever mentioning dyslexia at all.
No, because
at all.
I know somebody who's dyslexic and similar age, and he got taught to write with both hands because they thought he was reading backwards. So they made him write left-handed for a year to see if that'd fix it. And did you get any of that trying to fix your handwriting?
Oh, I had lots of things. I was sent off for calligraphy classes. I went to see an amazing British Chinese woman who was supposed to be able to teach me how to write beautifully, and she gave up with me. I had all sorts. And when I started off, At the bar, we used to have to do what called handwritten endorsements on the back of briefs to let people know what had happened on a case.
Yeah.
And I'd constantly get people phoning me up saying, Sam, can't read your writing, just tell me what's happened. Now it's a lot easier because we do it on a computer these days, but I just accepted it. That was the way I was. I just couldn't write very well.
No, I got picked up when I was 6, so I knew what it was, but always kind of was stuck in my handwriting's particularly poor, and so is my grammar and spelling. So you do get to a point where you hit a limit, and I write cursive now, but for a point I wrote with individual characters because they couldn't read my handwriting when I was writing handwritten job cards at work. Now, one of the things that really fascinates me is that my perception of law is that it's really the world of language and words and grammar, and like lawyers are really good at picking up any nuance that's wrong with a sentence to be able to get in, or that's my perception of it. Maybe I've watched too many movies, but now you obviously being dyslexic, maybe slightly weaker in that area. So we'll get on to where we think it's actually better off in your world. But first of all, how do you find that with people who probably, I imagine it's got more than its fair share of, shall we say, grammaristas and people who are really kind of held on the grammar world. And do you get problems with people picking up work you've written and your opponent taking it apart?
I have had that. I remember a particularly cantankerous female judge telling me my semicolon at page 13, line 12 was in the wrong place. There are pedants, but I think because I came up through the criminal law route and most of it is oral advocacy, it's increasingly, there's more and more written stuff because you have to do skeleton arguments for things. It wasn't so much of a problem because I'm quite good at talking and I think quite quickly on my feet. And that's really one of the key skills. And I'm quite good with people. I can talk to people. So, and I can listen. And I think one of the things that you have to develop when you're dyslexic is listening to other people. You have to listen out for things a lot more than other people do, because that's how, well, certainly for me, how you pick up information rather than sitting with a book. I pick it up audibly. So I don't think it
totally
was.
Agree.
I don't think it was too much of a problem. As I say, it really hit me when I switched over to doing civil work and realised for the first time I'm going to have to think logically and rationally about stuff, because when you're dealing with juries in crime, juries are just people and you just speak to people as though you'd speak to anybody else respectfully, and they understand arguments. Juries aren't particularly logical beings because they are people.
Yes. Yeah. And part of being dyslexic is being quite a dynamic thinker. And you tend to be, as you quite rightly pointed, quite good at talking and thinking dynamically, and also thinking in pictures rather than sort of more narratively. So I can imagine actually stood in front of the jury having to talk and paint a picture of it suits how your brain works.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I can do a jury speech now. I've been doing it for so long now. I can do it without notes. A lot of people read, but I tend to, and this is perhaps because it's the type of dyslexia I have. Mine's dysgraphica, which is a particular handwriting and spelling issue. I've got quite a good short-term memory. So although I can't read my own handwriting, once I've got it in my brain, what I'm going to say, I'm very good at just coming out and saying it without looking down at notes and things. And you pick up on cues, but because you do it that way rather than you looking at a note, you can actually watch people, and you can watch people on a jury, and you can work out what's actually going in and what's not going in, and you can tailor it accordingly. You pick up more, I think, on those body cues than perhaps other people would do.
Ah, yeah, I see. You've almost downloaded your closing speech, or whatever the technical term is for it, in your head.
Yeah, it is closing speech. Yeah.
And you've got it downloaded in your brain, ready to go, unlike maybe your opponent who's got it in front of the bullet point, wherever they've got it. And that actually then liberates you to watch the jury and allows you to dynamically on the fly tweak your closing speech as you're doing it.
Absolutely. That's a really good way of doing it. You don't get too much feedback from jury. That's one of the nice things about talking to 12 strangers. They don't normally, it's not like talking to your friends who will interject or hassle you and you can banter with, but you can pick up that you can see people's brains starting to whir, and they'll sort of nod maybe, and they'll understand what you're saying. And you're selling a point. And I think some of the best salespeople in the world are people who are dyslexic, because you know how to sell, because we can't rely on written stuff so much. You have to be quite persuasive when you speak.
Yes. Yeah. You hone the speaking one because the written one is lagging behind it.
Yeah. And how many times have we all said, I'll pick up the phone and speak to someone rather than having to sit and write a lengthy email to someone, because that just takes us 3 times as long.
Oh, I completely agree. It is that, like, get me to the verbal presentation of my idea and I will sell it to you. But having to write it in an email is tricky.
Absolutely.
No, and I like that. I like the fact that it gives you an advantage when you're in front of a jury of being able to just kind of read the room and feel it out, which I never really thought of before. I was thinking more of all the written work you have to do.
There is a lot of written work you have to do, and you have to do the prep. But when it comes to, say, cross-examining people, you know what the points that you want to get at, but you can read a person better and you can tailor it. And certainly when you're doing a closing speech as well. And let's not forget, sadly, a lot of the people that we deal with in criminal law are dyslexic. Dyslexic are disproportionately represented in the prison population.
Yes.
I can't remember the last statistics I looked at from the Howard Leaker Penal Law. I think it was something like 50% of people incarcerated, adult men, are dyslexic.
Yes, I understand it is quite a high number, and it's such a shame that...
It is, because things aren't picked up at school. And I was very fortunate. I never got told at school I was thick or stupid or I was an idiot. But plenty of my friends who are dyslexic had all those unfortunate experiences. They were told they'd never amount to anything because they couldn't write properly, they couldn't read. And it never occurred to the teacher that there might be a different teaching style that could be adapted for them.
Exactly. I mean, I kind of had quite a lot of the emotional side of it. It sounds like you might have not quite got as much of it, but you end up getting a load of self-limiting beliefs. And it's such a shame because we can name quite a few dyslexic people who've done quite big things as quite more likely to be an entrepreneur. But unfortunately, as you say, you're in your position, you're more likely to meet them and defend them. Do you ever... I was talking about this on the previous episode, Rebecca, about disclosing whether your clients are dyslexic or not. Have you ever had a situation where they're sort of telling you they can't read things as they're dyslexic, and then as they're barrister, you're like, well, me too. And does that really surprise them and bowl them off their feet?
I had that fairly recently in what's called a fast track trial in civil, which is... and it was just a road traffic accident, obviously very, very important to the chap I was representing because he was badly injured. And I gave him his statement to read. And you always have to be very careful with people because some people are illiterate, full stop, and that they're very embarrassed about it. So I noticed he wasn't reading it properly. So I said to him, do you need some help? Would you like me to read it out for you? And he said yes. And then he just sort of threw it across the room and said, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm dyslexic. And we had a chat about it. And I told him, I said, I'm dyslexic. And he said, well, you can read and write and you're doing your job that you're doing. And I said, that's because I was taught properly. And you can be taught how to read and write. We had a very frank discussion about it. And he was a grown man in his 30s. He worked in a factory. And he was flabbergasted because he said he'd do anything to avoid. He couldn't read a manual, couldn't read an engineering manual. But if someone showed him what to do, he could do the job better than anybody else. And he was stunned that I was doing the job I was doing, being dyslexic. And it was quite interesting talking to him, perhaps breaking down some of those myths and barriers that we have.
Yes, I agree. And it's one of the reasons of doing this sort of podcast series is that, I'm a professional engineer and you're a professional barrister. We both hold down quite good positions and quite interesting stuff and are dyslexic. And hopefully people who are listening are wanting to do these kind of roles, and you can actually do it. It's not a limitation at all.
Absolutely, you have to play to your strengths. And one of the things I found, certainly from me and watching my daughter, watching friends who are dyslexic, is we're quite good at solving problems.
Yes,
because we've had so many hurdles and barriers thrown up. We can't do the straightforward running at them and jumping over them. So we tend to go around or over or avoid them completely. So that gives us. We are very good at thinking things differently. I hate the phrase thinking outside the box, but I can't think of a better one off the top of my head. But we can think of unusual situations to get round problems, and whether that means take a silly example, a shopping list. A lot of people write a shopping list when they go to the supermarket. That drives me mad. I hate it. So I memorize in my head. I look round. I visualize my kitchen and think, is the bread in the bread bin? Are the baked beans in the cupboard? Do I need meat? Do I need fruit? Whereas my daughter will get out her mobile phone and she will talk to her phone and she will record a list of what she needs on her phone. So she uses the technology. She's that generation which is very au fait with this. So she does it that way rather than get a piece of pen and paper and do a list.
Yes. I mean, I use my phone too. That's my way around it. I mean, a smartphone has been a wonderful invention if you're dyslexic. I think,
absolutely.
It just does so much. Really helps it out.
Yeah, that and something like Dragon software. I have Dragon on my...
Me too.
And it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. It saves me so much time and helps me. But yeah, I often, if it's a very quick email, I'll speak the email rather than write it.
Do you find you speak some of your submissions and arguments in court? So actually you've written, like you're saying about skeleton argument, which is something you submit to court before the event.
Yeah.
If you've spoken a skeleton argument, you've already rehearsed
You've already done it. So, you have. And you can say to yourself, actually, with the hindsight, that sounds actually really quite weak. Maybe I'll rephrase that in a different way. Maybe that's not my best point. I won't concentrate so much on that. So yes, you do. When I was at bar school, one of the things we were encouraged to do was to stand in front of a full-length mirror and just watch ourselves doing it. And
with wig and gown on?
With a wig and gown on, which is ridiculous. You're standing in your bedroom. You're a spotty 20-year-old. You've been asked to do these things, and your mates are coming in because you're in a shared house and they're laughing at you. But it was actually really quite useful for me because I could hear myself saying these things. And my brain was going, actually, that sounds quite good. That doesn't sound so good. So I was reformulating it in my head as I spoke. So it was quite useful. But technology has made life so much easier, certainly in terms of doing lengthy advices and also looking stuff up as well. Yes. The internet's a great tool for looking things up. Like what I was talking about, the white book. The white book goes to about 2,500 pages, but you can now look it up online and you can hit there's an audio function. You can hit the speaker button and it will speak it out to you, which is great. Not so can't do it in court. But you're sitting in a corridor afterwards, you can.
Yes, headphones really on in court. Hang on, Judge.
Absolutely. You might be able to get away with that on a remote hearing, thinking about it. I've never tried it, but I wouldn't like to. Because obviously we're out now in a pandemic world. We're doing a lot of things remotely. And people like you're sitting here with headphones on. You might be able to do it. I'm not tech savvy enough to do it, so it's a bit embarrassing. But my daughter probably would be able to. She finds lots of ways.
When you switched to civil work, having to relearn stuff, you actually had a bit of a look into how modern technology would help you learn things, as you basically had to relearn another arm of law. Absolutely.
I did basically 3 months pupillage again, and I had to go and follow people around and watch them. And I did, and it was a whole new world. That's when I discovered Dragon. And that, I have to say, it's probably the best money I've spent in years, quite frankly. It saves me so much. And then also discovering with the smartphone I use, an Apple, other phones are available, of course.
Of course.
Being able just to be able to sit and dictate a fairly basic email and sketch out, being able to dictate a fairly, for now, quite complicated skeleton arguments. Now I've got the hand on doing the technology, and it saves me so much time. It's liberating as well.
Yes. Do you use text-to-speech software to read the skeleton back to you after you've written it for proofreading?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And that really helps with spelling as well, because my spelling is interesting, shall we say.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I know that one.
Yeah.
Because how are you finding? Obviously, you must have to get that squeaky clean before it goes into court and in front of the judge. We were mentioning earlier about people defending people with dyslexia. How are you finding it? Do you have to tell the judge anything to do with yourself being dyslexic, or maybe one of the people you're defending being dyslexic?
It's only ever with me come up once. I was reading out a statement that when I was doing criminal trials, prosecuting, I was a junior in a murder. And my job was to read out some statements to the jury, statements that had been agreed to save people, witnesses coming to court. And one of them was some quite complicated medical evidence, and I couldn't pronounce some of the medical terms. And I remember getting in my car and driving to a friend of mine, banging on their door, who was a doctor, saying, "You've got to help me," and presenting her with this statement and saying, "Can you read these words out to me?" And she just stood there and went, "You what? What do you mean you can't read this? It's obvious what it means." I said, "I can't do it." And she tried to break it down phonetically for me. Now, that means nothing to me. I just cannot do breaking things down phonetically. So we had a sort of a half an hour session of her telling me what the words were, me memorizing the words and the shapes of the words. And looking back, that's how I think that's how I learned to read. I heard the sound of a word, I memorized the shape of the word, and that's how I did it. Because I cannot break things down phonetically. So she really, really saved my bacon by doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've recently done a dyslexia correction program, and part of that is you have to model the meaning of the word, then write the word underneath it. And I think you're sort of doing the same thing, where you're having to bolt a picture with the word.
Absolutely.
And actually, when I say there or something, the picture of what I've done for there and the word underneath it, rather than phonetically.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I have friends who are deaf and use British Sign Language, and British Sign Language is a very visual language as well.
Yeah.
And I'm actually learning British Sign Language, and I found it quite not easy, but easier than I thought it would be to learn sign language because it is so visual. And I'm wondering whether that's maybe because I am dyslexic.
Yeah, could well be. Yeah,
it could be. It could be. It's quite interesting doing it. But I always have associations with words in my head, very much like you do as well. And Wikipedia is a wonderful thing because I have that lovely speaker button you can press and it will tell you what the word is. So I memorise the sound of the word.
Yes, yeah. I hadn't thought of it as sign language, but I could see that making sense, that because the phonetic kind of language rules don't count, do they, for sign language? They don't. Yeah, that's the word. So they don't apply. Yeah.
They don't apply at all. It's a completely different type of language. Say like we have the word weapon, which can mean all sorts of different things. There's no word for weapon in British Sign Language. You have to say, do you mean a hammer? Do you mean an axe? Do you mean a knife? You have to be quite specific. You build up a picture. It's the picture of the object. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, because he pulled out his weapon, and then it's like, did he shoot them or did he bang a nail in?
Exactly. Did he stab them or did he hit them over the head with a hammer? You have to be very direct in what you mean.
No, I hadn't even thought of it might be an advantage learning sign language.
No.
No, that is kind of cool. I like that.
It was interesting. So.
Cool. So I was sort of reading some of your profile and noticed that you have a bit of experience of, I thought we'd do a bit of a dive into defending people who've got mental health difficulties and maybe don't fully understand that. I thought, because we're touching on sort of neurodiversity, and I know it's not the same thing, but I thought that might be quite interesting to understand how that works. That was something that piqued my interest reading through the notes. Yeah.
Sadly, again, a lot of people who are in the penal system do have either diagnosed or underdiagnosed serious mental health problems. Please don't get me started on care in the community because I'll stand on a soapbox and I will rant about it. Because it doesn't exist. But there are a lot of people who are bipolar, schizophrenia, are paranoid, and it depends on their level of difficulty. They're either, you have to make a decision on the first one, and then you have input from a psychiatrist, whether they're what's called fit to plead. If they're fit to plead, they're then assumed to be able to have the cognitive functioning to be able to give you instructions and present a case in court. If they're unfit to plead, it's a different process. They don't have what's called a normal jury trial. And it's fascinating talking to people who have those mental health problems because often there is an overlap with dyslexia.
Okay.
There is. And a lot of it is down to, again, poor schooling, poor education, perhaps not having the best starts in life. You and I know now through my daughter, that you really have to battle to get a child stamaneted for dyslexia, or if you've got a child who's on the autistic spectrum, perhaps is Asperger's or even has ADHD, you really do have to push and really push very hard to do it. I had to pay privately for my daughter to be diagnosed. Fortunately, I had that resource. I was able to do it, but a lot of other people can't. So mental health problems aren't picked up, and neurodiversity, again, isn't picked up very often either. And by the time someone's left a formal education system, it gets very frustrating. So people who say are bipolar can find it very frustrating because people don't understand the way they communicate. So that frustration often boils over into violence. And people then who are dyslexic, who can't read and write, who can't perhaps access benefits because they can't fill in the forms, they can't go online, they get very frustrated as well. So it really all plays back into having a very good early understanding of dyslexia and other neurodiversities as well, and changing the way that we teach people, because at the moment, one teaching style doesn't fit everybody. And it's difficult when you've got people in a class of 30 and say 26 don't have any neurodiversity at all. They will understand what a teacher is trying to do, but the other 4 won't have a clue and they get left behind. So there is a very big overlap. And it's something that I've had to ask myself recently. Have I always been attracted to working with those sorts of people? Because I can perhaps understand some of the difficulties they've had. I don't know the answer to that, but it has been a feature of my career ever since I started, that I have represented a lot of people who are either neurodiverse, have mental health problems, or are somehow other disadvantaged in some other ways. I don't know. I don't know whether I've been attracted to them or they've been attracted to me. I simply don't know. Or maybe I just had a greater level of understanding, even though I didn't know myself I was dyslexic. I had some insight into their world. I really don't know the answer to that one. But it is interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that way, of the crossover, because we touched on the prison population with dyslexics, and then what was it, bipolar you were saying, and I think it's a level of frustration, and I see it. Perhaps I've seen it more now with my daughter. Although she's at a very good school and they help her. How old is your daughter? Sorry,
she's 14 now.
Okay,
so she's in her GCSE years and she's able to access a computer, and she can hopefully use a computer next year for her examinations. But I see just how frustrated she gets sometimes. And I just imagine, say she was 14 and no one had picked it up, and she was just left in a classroom and someone just thought, well, you're always going to be illiterate because you're lazy, because you're stupid, and how angry that would make somebody feel. And I think it is frustration because people don't understand.
Well, and also, I don't know if you've referred to it as being the gift of dyslexic, is because there are actually quite a lot of upsides to it.
There are.
And it's the school system, unfortunately, is not the place the upsides shine. And then you can end up with a bit of an emotional kind of attachment to it. But there is quite a lot of, entrepreneurs, inventors, all that kind of place, quite particularly in STEM fields. There's quite a lot of upside to it. And as we've spoken about with yourself doing things, reading juries and be able to dynamically think. And it's actually, if people understood that, like I've seen some statistics, I can't remember where I saw it, that I'll link it in the show notes, that if you put in sort of methods that help dyslexic people read in the classroom, so stuff that suits their brain. I think the analogy I come up with in a previous podcast was like, school teaches you how to operate a PC, but you're a Mac, so it doesn't matter how much you try and work Windows. It's not going to work. It's
never going to work. I agree with you.
But directly you teach, well, you're a Mac, and here is how to operate a Mac. These classes don't tend to have as many referrals, if any, to the sort of, I can't think of the right word, but the kids who are struggling, basically.
Yeah, have referral units or things like that. Yeah. And I think a lot of dyslexic kids drop out of school as well. But with the right support and the right encouragement, people can shine. And I wish we'd all get away from this idea that dyslexia's got anything to do with intelligence. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all to do with intelligence.
More likely to be more intelligent, actually.
Absolutely. Einstein was dyslexic. I love that one. Einstein was.
Newton, Steve Jobs. Yeah, we could go on. Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. And the other thing that I can do, and it's something someone pointed out to me because I didn't realise I could do it. We pluck information and we can make links from seemingly unconnected subjects and topics as well.
Yeah, dynamic reasoning. Yes.
Is that what it's called? It's just called wittering on generally.
Yeah. Well, I explained that to somebody. It's dynamic reasoning. There's a book apparently about it I need to read, but it's
right.
Yeah, it's the dynamic thinkers being able to kind of put that together and pull things, and rather than somebody who's non-dyslexic doesn't quite think like that. So it's providing alternative solutions.
We're not tramline thinkers. I think we think in different directions. My brain doesn't go from A, B, C down to Z. It starts at F and then maybe goes to Y and then goes back to B.
Yes, and then you like come out with this left field like, have you tried this? And
absolutely, like, yeah.
No, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah. No, it's good fun, and that's the nice thing. It's something I've discovered in the last 5 or 6 months since I've been running my website on the side. It's that, wow, all of this cool stuff that you just didn't realize you could do, rather than feeling like the guy who can't spell or uses the same there for every sentence, no respect of the context. It's like, wow, I didn't realize my brain could do this, and it could do this, and it could do this. It actually helps me with this, and I can learn stuff faster. But once you've got the right learning style plugged in, you're away with the races. But
absolutely. And the transformation is absolutely amazing. Going back to the guy, it was only a few weeks ago, the guy I represented in a civil trial, I gave him some resources. We found some websites together and he took some screenshots of stuff. And he got in touch with me about a week or so ago, and he's enrolled on an online program and he's starting to begin to read.
Oh, brilliant.
The age of 35. I had a phone call from him just out of the blue. It was lovely. He said, "You won't remember me." And I remembered his voice. And I said, "Yes, I do. And I thought he was going to have a moan about the case. And he wasn't. Instinctively, a lawyer being defensive. And he said, "No, thank you for helping me, because now I've started to learn to read."
Wow.
Which is absolutely amazing. Yeah.
That is brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, I was really pleased about that. Yeah. But we have to celebrate the differences. And we wouldn't have had this conversation 200 years ago, because not everybody could read or write 200 years ago. It was only the nobility or the clergy that did. So dyslexia wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue. It's only become an issue because of the Victorian way we educate kids.
Yes. I read a book recently called The Gift of Dyslexia, and it refers to dyslexia as the term you are given when the school system gets hold of you and realizes that you don't fit into their kind of thing. And it's the emotional stuff of it.
It's a
fascinating take on it.
The triangles trying to go into the square cogs. Yeah, we just don't fit. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't work at all. But no, that's impressive. Like, the more, because I can't spot other dyslexic people in the wild without them telling me they are, and it's fascinating.
I can now.
Can you?
Yeah, I think because I had so many years doing criminal, because you have to ask people to read stuff.
Of course, yes.
You either have someone who is illiterate, who's never, or they're illiterate because they're dyslexic. So you pick up, and I always ask people now, "Are you dyslexic?" And they go, "I'm not sure, but I think I might be." They might have mentioned it to me at school. So I can start with people I represent. I've started to have more clues. And a lot of my friends are dyslexic, and I don't know whether that's because we all, I don't know, that horrible old expression, birds of a feather flock together. But
quite a lot of mine aren't. So
quite a few of mine. My daughter's godmother is dyslexic, and she's an intellectual property lawyer.
Oh, wow.
She's utterly amazing. And she has this very proud boast that throughout the whole of her career, she has never written a report in her life, because she's always used either a dictaphone or a secretary to do her writing. She doesn't write anything because she can't.
That's her way of getting not getting around it, but it's her way of mitigating it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I did ask her before we started this process. I said, "Would you mind if I mention that?" And she said, "No, not at all."
No. Well, why not? Because that was one of the questions I got written down is like, any advice for sort of young potential lawyers who are dyslexic and are worried that that's going to be a problem when they get into practice?
I think it's a lot easier now than it was. It's hard for me to answer that in many ways because I came to my diagnosis so late. But because I came through it late, it's perfectly possible because I'm here to show that you can be dyslexic and a lawyer. And there are plenty of dyslexic and or other forms of neurodiversity lawyers around. There are many lawyers who are on the autistic spectrum. Many. There are some I know who have ADHD. It's perfectly possible. I'm not going to lie and say it will be easy because it's not in any professional field. I think the harder question is, and this is a very personal question, is whether you disclose it or not. And that's a much harder decision. I think the technology is there to assist you so you can do a perfectly good job. If you've got the intellectual capacity, you can do a perfectly good job. It's whether you wish to tell people or not. And that's a much harder decision. And that's probably a different podcast altogether.
Yeah. Yes, it probably is actually, because that could be ours. It's interesting when I've been on various neurodiversity stuff and it's like the question always comes up, do you tell people?
Do you tell people? Not? I think it's a very personal choice. I make no secret of it now. I don't, apart from today, I don't broadcast it generally. But
you're going to broadcast it to whoever I can get this in front of. Yeah.
That will be a huge audience, Matthew, a huge audience. Absolutely enormous. But I've been a pupil supervisor, what used to be called a pupil mistress, pupil master. So I've had someone following me around for 12 months doing the sort of apprenticeship part of the job.
Yes.
Once you've got your law degree and you've been to bar school, you have to do 12 months of pupillage. So you're basically following someone around. Yeah, and I've had people who have been dyslexic and have said to me, I'm going to tell you I'm dyslexic as though it's some sort of big, guilty, bad secret. And I've gone, okay, well, that makes two of us. That's fine. And they've been pleasantly surprised. I don't think people care as long as you can do the job is the answer.
Exactly. And I imagine the relief that washes over their face as they've awkwardly spilled this out of their mouth.
Absolutely. There are there are many other problems at the moment, but being dyslexic isn't one. You can be a very, very good legal profession, whichever side of the profession you want to go on, whether you want, and if you're a barrister, whether you're going to a private or public service, should make very little difference these days. That's not to say there isn't stigma. There are still some dinosaurs out there who think, dyslexic means stupid, but they're few and far between. And like the dinosaurs, they're dying out. So,
yes, they're going to get hit by a comet at some point anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest tip is just to utilise the technology. I wish I'd discovered Dragon, other speech to writing software years and years ago to have saved me hours of work.
Yes, definitely. I do think utilising technology is very important, and knowing it's there. Like, what have I got? 24 hacks on the website at a minute, and people still send me like, I didn't know there was a dyslexic friendly font, and they're like,
absolutely, yeah. It's very, 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 very useful. The P's are longer, the B's are longer, and the D's, the upstrokes are much better. And I haven't got them with me. I use what they look like sunglasses, and I've actually worn them in course. But they are coloured glasses that have. I have plastic sheets that I put over my computer. It stops some of the words jumping around. And my colour is a purple colour, so my glasses are purple, and they look quite cool. So when I'm out and about, they're nothing, but they just look like sunglasses.
Do you look like Bono?
Sadly not. Quite like his money though.
Helpful,
but I've had to explain to a couple of judges what I'm doing when I put them on. When if there's a new piece of information I need to look at on the computer, I put them on. I can see sometimes they're looking at me going, Miss Forsyth, you're not supposed to be wearing sunglasses in court. And I've had to explain. And then most of them go, all right, whatever, get on with it.
Yes, so they are really understanding, and it's not
it's getting better. It's getting better. And I think partly because of my level of course, I don't take any nonsense from anybody anymore. Life's too short. I've been there, done it. I don't want to have these battles. So So, yeah, it's just harder when you're starting off because you don't want to upset people and you don't want to stand out. I've just got to that stage now where they've got over the fact I'm female at the bar. They've got over the fact that, I've got a daughter at the bar, so they can cope with me being dyslexic as well.
Yes. So if it was somebody young on pupillage and they did the similar thing with the glasses, how would they kind of approach it? Because obviously, as you say, you're thick skin and heavily experienced.
I think you have to set out the groundwork. And just like you'd say, tip off a bunch of magistrates or a judge if there was a particularly sensitive case, say some of the awful cases we have to deal with, say a driving case where someone has been killed, they're always particularly sensitive. And very often the victims' families come to court, quite right. But you always let a judge know if the family are there. So just in that same sort of way, you let your tribunal know that this is what I'm going to do so people aren't taken by surprise. You will say, I am going to use, as I have done, you may see me holding up a purple sheet to put over my laptop. You may see me putting on a different set of glasses. This is why I'm doing it. And then people, if the people are generally forewarned, they don't mind. So it's a question of how you approach it, unless you want to make a statement. Some people do. But I've never particularly taken that approach. Some people do, and I don't blame them sometimes.
No, I think it's once you've sort of shifted gear in taking ownership of being dyslexic and realising its upside, it does feel like you're like, awesome. You can sort of run it around.
I am not embarrassed in the slightest about
me neither.
Dyslexia. It is what I am. And, you can either like me or not like me, not because I'm dyslexic, my personality may not agree with yours. We can't get on with everybody, but it is what I am. So take it or leave it. It's your problem, not mine.
No, that's it. And it's an attitude realignment, as you've touched on with other things outside of just being dyslexic that have changed while you've been at the bar.
Yeah, but I started at the bar. You couldn't wear trousers. You had to wear skirts or dresses.
Oh, yes. Yes, as a female.
Absolutely. Yes. I remember the first time I wore a pair of trousers into court and I was told I looked like a bus conductor by a judge. Oof. Yeah, quite. Or when I did pupillage interviews, I was asked, well, why should we bother training you? Because you're going to get married and go off and have kids. So things have changed a lot in the last 30 years.
Yeah, thank God for that.
So I would say to young students, embrace your neurodiversity. It will lead you, as it's led me, down different paths. So don't be afraid of who you are. But again, I respect it's a very personal decision for people. Yes. People want to say or not. And I would never say to someone, you must do that. I think that's the wrong approach.
Yes, I agree with you. It's just interesting. Quite a lot of young dyslexic potential future barristers might be listening, and I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on it.
Absolutely.
So I thought I got a couple of rapid fire questions I thought I'd ask just near the end. Obviously, you've been dyslexic all your life, but now you know as from the last 5 years. So is there a prejudice you would have had about dyslexia before that you feel you've now proven wrong?
I don't think so. I didn't know, as I say, what dyslexia was, particularly till quite recently. No, I don't think so. I was very fortunate never to be told I was stupid because I was dyslexic. I had the problems I had when I was younger. If someone had told me I was stupid, I think I might have had an issue with that.
Yes, you were quite lucky to not be told you were stupid. I think it tends to be a common theme. It
tends to be, which is most unfortunate, I've been called many things, but stupid's never been one of them.
Okay, and how would you describe dyslexia now with all the sort of new information you've gained about it, if you had to describe it to somebody who come in from another planet?
It's one of the ways that human beings think. There are many ways human beings think. Some people think this way, some people think that way. I happen to think in this particular way.
Yes, no, couldn't agree more. Okay, I think it feels like a good place to end. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, well, thank you for having me, Matthew, and thank you for sharing your experiences with me too. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on. I think it's been really, really interesting conversation. If anybody wants to see what show notes are, they're available at dyslexialifehacks.com. Bye for now.